today. I'll start with the first one for you. So, basically, a situation that we've got a property that's being held within a particular company, okay, which has, in this particular case, two shareholders, but I suppose you can answer from a perspective of multiple shareholders of this particular company, and for whatever reason, the shareholders in this particular company are not working together well anymore. And basically, it's a situation where they need to figure out how to sort out the situation where you've got multiple shareholders owning shares in a company, and that particular company holds immovable assets. How do you rectify the situation? What are some of the options that the shareholders can use to sort of rectify the situation?
The joint ownership over assets has always been a concern amongst many, many people, whether it's in divorces or partnerships gone wrong. And this particularly when two individuals actually own a property jointly. So each one is co-owner of the property and there's a dispute between them. Now, the same issue typically does arise when it comes to companies, and people don't realize the fact that it does. Because at the end of the day, even though the company's one sole shareholder, the company's one sole owner, and you have multiple people that are shareholders, the issue still lies in the fact that there's multiple people that are shareholders. And as soon as you put two human beings into the room together, there's a chance that there is going to be a dispute amongst them. So whether it's joint ownership, whether it's through a company, you cannot ignore the fact that there has to be some form of mechanism in place to be able to deal with potential deadlocks and deal with potential disputes. Now, in an instance where a company owns a property and one of the shareholders, so this is a basic example, there could be many, many, many different types of disputes and fights. But if we take just this one example, and this happens very, very often, two shareholders, one company, one property, let's say the property is not doing well, or it's doing well, but it's not doing as well as one of the shareholders would like it to be doing. And I find this happens quite frequently with shareholders that live abroad, where the value of the rand is not as strong as, say, the pound. So receiving cash flow and rand value isn't valuable to them, and they would rather actually dispose of the asset, take the capital out, and invest it abroad or invest it in something else. So this happens quite frequently. And now this company is receiving income on a monthly basis. The South African shareholder, as an example, is feeling great. They're receiving cash flow every month. The UK shareholder, as an example, isn't, and he wants out. Now, what are the different solutions in a situation like this? So obviously the one solution is the sale of the property. If both parties agree to just sell the property, easy solution, capital comes in, capital gets distributed, company gets dissolved, job done, everyone walks away happy. But if one of the shareholders refuses to sell, this is obviously a dispute between the shareholders. Now, there is case law, and this is very strange case law, but I had to research this in one of my cases recently. Even if there isn't a written shareholders agreement, if there's a fundamental understanding between the shareholders that can be proven, one shareholder may actually approach the court to compel the sale of the property based on the fact that this agreement existed and the one shareholder should have actually been compelled to vote in favor of selling the property. So that's just something to keep in mind, that even agreements that aren't in writing, provided they can be proven, you can rely on these to approach the court. But typically speaking, if you don't have a shareholders agreement in writing, this would be very difficult. And unfortunately, in cases like that, you don't have much of a choice but to dissolve the company, because there is a material dispute amongst the shareholders. And if you dissolve the company, effectively it goes into liquidation. The asset's going to be sold anyway, so you have the same result. So the UK shareholder would likely get his way in a situation like that, because the company would have to be dissolved, which would by implication require the sale of the asset, South African shareholder could consider possibly buying the asset from this liquidation or from the company and continuing trading with it. Now, these are real life situations and real life solutions that happen quite frequently. What we would suggest before going into a transaction, utilizing a company that has multiple shareholders, is plan ahead for this, right? So you either have the option of setting the roadmap and, for example, setting certain objective metrics or criteria upon which the property will be sold and it cannot be disputed. So, for example, if the property is not performing well, if the cash flow is negative, if it's a building, for example, for 6 months in a row running at a loss, or occupancy dips, or there's a certain amount of delinquency, whatever the case is, set this roadmap ahead of time, because this would allow for an easy mechanism to actually sell this property. Another solution, for example, is certain buyout clauses. Now, you can have forced buyout clauses, or you could basically just have a clause where if a person decides to exercise an option, or exercise basically a right of first refusal, they're allowed to put their shares on the market and they're allowed to sell it. The company, the other shareholder, for example, has the right to buy it first at a certain value. You can even have the value pre-calculated so that the shareholder that wants to retain the property has the right to buy it first, and if that doesn't work, the other person can sell it to a third party. So situations like that also often arise, and it's a nice solution. So remember, it's not about just selling the property out of the company. There are also solutions where you can sell your shares and exit the company. But again, this is quite a long conversation that we can have, but it's just something to bear in mind that there are two different ways of exiting a single property investment.
Great, thank you for that.